Bully Resistance Show is brought to you by Nathan Alfred Insurance, an independent insurance agency located in Vienna, West Virginia. They specialize in auto, home, life, and business insurance. What makes this agency unique is your ability to shop the market for you. The Bully Resistance Show is brought to you by Planet Fitness. Come check out your new and improved Planet Fitness. I'm a member of Planet Fitness, and they have all new strength equipment, tanning beds, rowing machines, and more. Starting at just $10 a month, you can join Planet Fitness, home of the judgment-free zone, where members experience a hassle-free, non-intimidating environment. Please see club or visit planetfitness.com for more information. The Bully Resistance Show is also brought to you by Berkshire Hathaway Home Service Real Estate Center as a part of their community outreach. They truly believe that selling houses is important, but helping make our community a better place to live is even more important. The Bully Resistance Show is also brought to you by Valley Chapel United Methodist Church and United Methodist Church located in Fairmont, West Virginia, worshiping, praying, and living the Word of God as a family. Also want to thank Bobby and Michelle Jones, Jeff Belt, Pamela Sayer, Rick Modisett, Connie Pample, Jerry and Karen Gartrell, Crossroads Church. You can help us fight bullying in the public schools and help support the Bullying Resistance Show with David Wells. For more information, go to www.davebond.org. That's www.davebond.org. Welcome, everyone, to the Bully Resistance Show with David Wells, nationally known smooth jazz artist, CEO and co-founder of the Chocolate Jazz Foundation, and the co-host of a 2-hour syndicated radio program called Chocolate Jazz Radio. Bully Resistance is a weekly 1-hour show that's a motivational, informative, and inspirational program. We will have interviews with musicians, actors, government officials, politicians, psychologists, counselors, and just average day citizens. Of course, the topics will include making the right choices, never giving up desire, discipline, determination, bullying in public schools or workplace and in your community, bully resistance and prevention, self-defense, jiu-jitsu, and current affairs, and much, much more. And if you're ready, we are. Here's your host, David Wells.
I want to thank everyone for tuning in to another episode of the Bully Resistance Show with David Wells. My name is David. And today we have Ryan Ford from Atlanta, Georgia, who is the founder and host of the Grappling Central podcast, which is actually ranked number 1 on iTunes in his category. Also, of course, he's an entrepreneur and trains and competes in jiu-jitsu. So at this time, Ryan, I want to thank you for coming back on to the Bully Resistance Show.
Oh, David, I greatly appreciate you having me, man. Happy to be here. And I'm excited to talk to you about all things bullying.
Well, I'll tell you this before we get started in the interview. I want to let my listeners know that I'm a huge fan of the Grappling Central podcast. And it's funny because as I listen to your podcast, you have a lot of fans. And, and as a full-time musician, of course, I travel all the time. And I started listening to podcasts probably about maybe over a year ago, and yours is one that I don't miss. But I mentioned this to you. One of the reasons, or a few reasons, why I like your podcast. First, it's entertaining, it's professionally done, great quality, and also you have the Michael Jordans of jiu-jitsu, and you have all the best of the best practitioners and competitors in jiu-jitsu, and it's just. And you don't have the same, the questions, and it varies from one podcast to the other. But so anyway, kudos with that.
Thank you so much. Yeah, I greatly appreciate you listening, man. It's the podcast has been pretty incredible, the growth of it in the last 3 years. I started it almost exactly 3 years ago. Your support means a lot, and it's been a lot of fun, a lot of work, but a lot of fun watching it grow.
Thanks.
So thank you for that.
Before we hear your story of you dealing with, of course, ADD and getting through school, and if that wasn't bad enough, just getting bullied because of your size, can you just give the listeners just a better idea of who you are?
Yeah, absolutely. So I was born in a little town in Wisconsin in 1985. I just turned 33 this year. I only lived in Wisconsin for the first year of my life or so. My family's kind of scattered around the Midwest, mainly around the Chicago area. And I moved to Atlanta when I was a kid, and my immediate family has been here ever since. I was a pretty hyperactive kid. I was really into like Ninja Turtles and professional wrestling, which sparked my love for martial arts. And I practiced Taekwondo from the age of like 7 until I was around 11. Wrestled for a very, very brief time in middle school, which I regret not continuing now. And then just before my 21st birthday, I started training Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, which has been my life's passion ever since. And it led me to train and compete all over the U.S., and I also have been able to train in Brazil. I've been married for 5 years now to my wife, Karen, and we're planning on moving to her hometown of Sao Paulo, Brazil, hopefully soon as her citizenship in the United States wraps up. So
wow.
Just kind of a nutshell. Yeah, just in a nutshell.
Also, what was interesting, I found out, and just talking with you a few days ago, you just got back from California, and you're a commentator for tournaments. Is that correct? Yeah.
I've been getting. It's funny. The podcast has been kind of leading me to some commentary gigs. I was in San Francisco 2 weeks ago, commentating my friend Kurt Osiander's event that he had. It's a submission-only tournament that he does every once in a while, and I got to go out there and commentate for him. And then I just got back in town last night from St. Louis. I was commentating the U.S. Combat Wrestling Nationals, which is a really cool event and a really neat format. These commentary things are starting to kind of roll in now, which is a lot of fun. I really enjoy it.
I guess one of the things I want to talk about and what's intriguing me about you is that you're a professional podcaster. You do it full time, and if anybody knows anything about podcasting, of course, for several years now, podcasting is growing 10 to 20% each year, which is job security for you. Now, there's a difference between my podcast and your podcast. You're, of course, you're a full time. I think with me, it just sort of helps me brand what I'm trying to do into fighting against bullying. But can you tell us how you actually got started into podcasting?
Yeah, sure. So my career in podcasting began. I always joke it began with complete desperation and despair. But thankfully, it has a happy ending. The podcast launched in 2015, but I'll go ahead and give you the backstory.
Sure.
Growing up, I lived a pretty aimless life in my teens and early 20s. I pretty much lived day to day, and I didn't have any real plans beyond the weekend. I bounced from job to job a lot in my early 20s, and my only real concern was being able to pay the few monthly bills that I had, which included my jiu-jitsu training. And then in my mid-20s, I found a balance that I liked, teaching kids jiu-jitsu classes in the afternoons and working nightclub security in the evenings. I bounced at bars for several years, and during the time I met my wife. We dated for a little while, and she was here as a student, and after her student visa expired, she went back to Brazil to renew it, and it was denied for reasons that we still can't understand. But I knew I was going to marry her anyways, so I scraped up the money to get her a ring and a ticket to Brazil, and I flew down there and proposed to her. But it would take about 2 years to get her back into the U.S. So we could get married. So it was very tough. And one of the stipulations to getting her back was that I had to be able to prove that I was making enough income to provide for her. They had a specific income bracket requirement, and I was not in it. So teaching jiu-jitsu and bouncing just didn't quite pan out financially like I thought. Yeah. So anyway, so I had to quit teaching jiu-jitsu and bouncing and all that and get a better paying gig, which led me to managing a warehouse night shift about 6 days a week, very long days. And the schedule caused me to have to stop training during this time as well, just after getting my purple belt.
Sure.
And eventually we got her back, and we got married in 2013. And then about a week after we were married, I was all of a sudden laid off. They basically cut way back on night crew production in the warehouse and in the assembly that I was working in. And I was suddenly unemployed within the first week of my wife's return to the U.S. So it's important to point out that she was, at the time, she wasn't legally allowed to work either. So for her first 6 months of being here, there's like a little probationary period. So I had to scramble and find multiple odd jobs, and things were very difficult. We ate a lot of ramen noodle dinners by candlelight, and the candles were not for romantic purposes. So we were underwater with rent and bills, and I wasn't sure what my out was, because, as I mentioned earlier, I had not made any life plans previously. I really didn't even consider that I would ever have a wife someday, and eventually a family to support. So I was happy and thankful that I found Karen, but I was completely unprepared. And that was becoming painfully obvious within our early time in our marriage. And then finally I had my big break, or what I thought was a big break, through a friend of mine in jiu-jitsu. I was brought into a company that did fiber optic drafting for Comcast
Sure.
and AT&T. So it sounds fancy, but really my job was just to draw lines on maps to show cable companies where to dig in the ground to install new service for businesses and stuff. And it was incredibly dull, but it paid surprisingly well. So we finally found air to breathe and recover from our very tough first year of marriage. And it was during that time that I exhausted my music playlist, because as you can imagine, if you're sitting there in a cubicle all day drawing lines, you got to listen to something, because otherwise you'll just go insane.
Sure.
And I exhausted all my music playlists, and I was kind of complaining about it to a friend, and he said, "Man, you should start listening to podcasts." And I was sort of familiar with what a podcast was, but I hadn't listened to one before. So I started really getting into it, and I noticed that at the time there were only a small handful of podcasts about jiu-jitsu.
Sure.
Most of them were 2 to 3 hosts. Some of them had like a round table discussion kind of format, which was cool too. But I noticed that there just seemed to be a mostly untapped niche for one-on-one long-form interviews with respected black belts. So the idea to start my own podcast was initially planted at that time while I was still at that job, because I just thought it'd be hey, it'd be cool to have my own thing like that. And ultimately, I always wanted to be able to not have to work for other people. And then, ironically, that opportunity crashed down upon me. The company lost their biggest account, and the small team that I was on were all laid off.
Wow.
So I was given I was just over the year mark with that company. I was excuse me, one sec, David.
Sure.
God, sorry, acid reflux. So the company lost their biggest account. So my team was laid off and stuff, and I was given a severance package because I was there for a year, and I was just beyond frustrated. I was in the exact same position 2 years prior when my wife first got here. I was embarrassed and I was ashamed, and I was just embarrassed that I couldn't seem to get things stable. And at that point, I couldn't muster up the motivation to start filling out applications and sending resumes out. I fell into a pretty deep bit of sulking and feeling sorry for myself before having a sudden epiphany that, I could use this severance package that the company gave me to
Sure.
pay for rent for a couple months. And if I could use that for a few months and just grind hard on starting a podcast, that maybe I could create this. And, at this point, my wife was working as a nanny, and thankfully she was incredibly supportive of the idea, even though I'm proposing that, hey, we're not going to make any money for a long time, or maybe even never, but I'd really like to try this. And thankfully she believed in it. So I launched the show in October of 2015. And about a year later, we reached and maintained the #1 spot in our category on iTunes for Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu and grappling. And then about 6 months after that, I was able to stop doing any side work at all and pursue it full time. So it's turned out really well, thankfully.
Let me ask you this question. I know there's all sorts of facets in doing anything that you want to do, especially as an entrepreneur running a business. I mean, a lot of people don't know what all is entailed in a podcast, but what has been actually the most difficult thing about having your own podcast? Is it the at the actual recording? Is it the interviews? Is it juggling things? I mean, what is the most difficult thing?
Yeah, no, it's a good question. It's the grind of running the show. When it's all said and done, I typically put in close to 80 hours a week working on the podcast, between booking guests and writing interviews and having people cancel on me and having to scramble to find someone new and write their interview last minute, and
Sure.
recording and editing and marketing. It's a lot of work. We have a very distinct artwork style that we use for each episode. My wife is a graphic designer now, and she's very good, and she draws these cool characters, kind of like comic book characters of each guest that's on the show. So it's become kind of our distinct look.
Right.
And so besides the artwork, everything else is on me. I mean, literally everything. So It's the grind of doing that nonstop. I do 2 episodes a week, and it gets really tiring sometimes. And I think that there's a reason that statistically most podcasts don't last, because it really isn't easy. Unless you're just doing it as a hobby, and then it's, of course, there's not much to it.
But Ryan, the potential, if you're willing to put in the time like you have, the potential of making money, it's a good thing. It just keeps on building. But anyway, let me ask you this. I for the listeners, I mentioned this on my last show, and I mentioned that there's so many people that have great ideas and dreams. And as I travel across the country, they're either they want to start their own business or they want to be musicians, but they never actually take the first step in making it a reality. And I just want to ask you, why do you think that is? Why do you think people, all they do is just think about doing things, but they never actually take the first step? Why do they never take the first step, I guess?
Well, I think that most people are not entrepreneurs. I think the thought of going off on your own and risking the stability that a steady paycheck with an established company brings is too much for most people. I think it's a personality thing, I guess, in my opinion. I struggled badly in school growing up because of the monotony of the structure of the public school system. Right. When I got into the workforce after school, it wasn't much different. And to me, having to punch a clock and report to someone and have to get permission to take a lunch break and things like that was excruciating. I literally felt like I was just dying inside, having to work for companies or other people. And I just couldn't get past the fact that I was trading like hours of my life for a measly paycheck. So for me, the risk of taking the leap into entrepreneurship, was worth not having to work a job I hated, essentially. And then after I was laid off from that drafting job, I just reached a breaking point where even if I ended up homeless, it didn't seem as bad in my mind as having to slave away in a cubicle or throw drunk people out of a bar every night. But you have to keep in mind that I'm wired a little differently than a lot of people, and there's nothing wrong with either way of being. If you're someone who craves stability and growth within an established company, and you want to have a 401k and then possibly a pension, although a pension is probably unlikely these days, there's nothing wrong with that. That's most people. You're normal. In fact, if I'm being real, that's the smarter option. The odds of failing completely as an entrepreneur are insanely high. But if you're one of the fidgety, filthy few who can't bear the thought of not working for yourself and you're willing to risk falling in the mud over and over again, then, go for it,
Right. A lot of people, they come to me and they say, man, I really want to go ahead and be a full-time musician and travel across the country and everything else. And then they look at people like you and they listen to your podcast and, they know how successful you are. But I know for a fact that everyone, we go through a lot of ups and downs. It's just not all glamour. That's for sure. They don't realize that, we're on the phones, we're doing the bookings, we're back in the studio, we're recording again. We're dealing with radio promoters, we're dealing with politics involved. We're dealing with competition, new artists coming back. And, you hear the saying, you're only as good as your last single. And, but was there ever a time, where you got frustrated to a point where you just wanted to say, I can't deal with this any longer? And then my next follow-up question is then what made you keep going? Of course, that you're still doing the podcast now.
Yeah, no, good question. I probably say that every week. There's probably a moment every week where I have a moment where I'm just like, I don't want to do this anymore. God, it's so much. But once I get over it, once I kind of, I think the stress just builds up. My plate gets pretty full sometimes, and everyone has those moments. You have a lot of them. And it just kind of becomes a thing that you say, but then, you just keep grinding away and keep going. As far as what keeps me going, is that ultimately I do love what I do. I get to talk to my heroes every day. I get to talk to people that I really idolize and admire. And I get to talk to people that I haven't even heard of too. There's people that get recommended to me from listeners, like, hey man, there's this guy who teaches, in Texas. He's awesome. We should talk to him. And I don't even know who he is, but then we talk, and it's like, man, this guy's great. And I get to meet new friends and people, and it's led me to commentary gigs now. And So that's I think what keeps me going is ultimately there's first of all there's no way that I can work a normal job again. I'm just not designed for that, in my core. And then secondly, I'm very passionate about what I do. I get to talk about jiu-jitsu all day, which for me is great, so.
Well, Ryan, if you don't mind, I just want to go ahead and just take a few minutes and just recognize the sponsors and also just let the listeners know actually how they can help support the Bully Resistance Show. That's next.
Sure.
The Bully Resistance Show is brought to you by Nathan Alfred Insurance, an independent insurance agency located in Vienna, West Virginia. They specialize in auto, home, life, and business insurance. What makes this agency unique is your ability to shop the market for you. The Bully Resistance Show is brought to you by Planet Fitness. Come check out your new and improved Planet Fitness. I'm a member of Planet Fitness, and they have all new strength equipment, tanning beds, rowing machines, and more. Starting at just $10 a month, you can join Planet Fitness, home of the judgment-free zone, where members experience a hassle-free, not-intimidating environment. Please see club or visit planetfitness.com for more information. The Bully Resistance Show is also brought to you by Berkshire Hathaway Home Service Real Estate Center as a part of their community outreach. They truly believe that selling houses is important, but helping make our community a better place to live is even more important. The Bully Resistance Show is also brought to you by Valley Chapel United Methodist Church and United Methodist Church located in Fairmont, West Virginia, worshiping, praying, and living the Word of God as a family. Also want to thank Bobby and Michelle Jones, Jeff Belt, Pamela Sayer, Rick Madison, Connie Pample, Jerry and Karen Gartrell, Crossroads Church. You can help us fight bullying in the public schools and help support the Bullying Resistance Show with David Wells. For more information, go to www.davebond.org. That's www.davebond.org.
Well, thanks for tuning back in to the Bully Resistance Show with David Wells. My name is David, and today we've actually been talking to Ryan Ford, actually from Atlanta, Georgia, who is a professional podcaster, does it for a living. Also, he competes and trains jiu-jitsu. I want to mention this to you. My wife, just now getting into the bullying and your upbringing in school. My wife has always told me for the last few years that that I have ADD, or I couldn't just stay focused on a conversation. If somebody's trying to have a conversation with me, I always usually zone out if it's too long. And what's funny, there's actually been times when I would actually catch myself carrying a conversation and I would get distracted. And but it was funny because when I was putting the show together, I saw where you mentioned that you had severe ADD, ADHD, and behavior issues, and you actually didn't fit well into the mold of the public school system. My question is, Ryan, how did you know? How did you know that? I guess that you had severe ADD or behavior issues, and then did your parents tell you, or did you get tested, or did something happen that you realized that you have issues or ADD?
Yeah, definitely. I was a pretty blatant case of ADD from a young age. I was the ADD poster boy, so it wasn't hard to figure out. But for as long as I can remember, I've had a really hard time sitting still. I'd get bored easily, and I still get bored easily sometimes, and it was very difficult for me to adapt to the mold that the public school system expects,
Sure.
And as a small kid, maybe in second grade or something like that, my parents were told by teachers and a school counselor that I was definitely ADD and that it was going to be hard for them to keep me in regular classes, and I'd need to be moved to a behavior disorder class, and I'd remain in behavior disorder classes for the remainder of my time in school. So you have to keep in mind that these classes, they weren't just for kids with ADD. They were for also kids who were dyslexic, but mostly it was kids with severe anger and behavior problems. So it was basically a group of misfits and delinquents, future convicts, axe murderers. Just kidding, only a little bit. But yeah, I was diagnosed with ADD and OCD from a very young age by teachers and ultimately a child therapist.
Well, getting through school, how did you actually get through what school that you got through having ADD? It's an attention deficit. You had to pass your grades and move on.
Yeah, well, truth be told, I didn't, is the easy answer. I was kicked out of 2 middle schools and eventually dropped out in high school. I struggled very badly with school due to being unable to focus, and over time, school became a place that I just felt like I was coming in every day to be put on trial. I felt like I was showing up to a place where every day I was just going to be told everything I was doing wrong, and being in the behavior disorder class kind of constantly reminded me that something was wrong with me and that I wasn't normal. I was a misfit, and over time, through my adolescence, that put a real chip on my shoulder. I started to really resent authority. I was belligerent and confrontational with almost everybody, and it got to the point where school was nothing more than just a social scene for me, and eventually the faculty just threw up their hands and quit bothering to even assign me work. And then shortly after my 18th birthday, I was given the ultimatum to drop out or just be expelled, and so I dropped out, and I got a job in a fast food joint. But today I've realized that being wired differently is really one of my greatest assets. You know, I've learned to harness it and to use it as a strength rather than seeing it as something working against me. You know, it kind of there was another thing I meant to mention earlier when you were asking about, you know, like why people don't take that initial step and why people don't chase their dreams and stuff. I think a lot of it has to do with with feedback that they get from people, but I think ultimately it's a combination of different things. If you don't mind, I'll break down kind of each one and do my best to illustrate how the reason ultimately boils down to the same thing, and that thing is failure. Okay. The first reason is fear. Lots of people would love to work for themselves and create a product or the latest and greatest app or start a business of some kind. But fear is what usually stops them. It's the fear of, you know, sacrificing stability, like I mentioned before, and it's the fear of what others are going to think, and it's the fear of losing money or going into bad debt. Fear is what stops a lot of people. And but if you look closely at all these fears, well, what do they boil down to? Are they afraid that they're going to leave a job and become wildly successful on their own, or, you know, are they afraid their friends and family are going to be proud and impressed by their success? Of course not. You know, they're afraid of failing. So fear of failure, I think, is the first reason. The second reason is that as an entrepreneur, failing is your job. You'll suffer and screw up again and again. It's just part of the package. So for people who fear failure, who make the jump anyways, they get VIP access into failing. You know, they get the full experience, and their threshold for it can sometimes be very low. And then they panic and they run back to safety. So you know, they go back to a stable job or whatever. So reason number two is that they experience failures and it's too much. They fatigue, and it's too much for them. And then the third reason is kind of what I was talking about earlier about, you know, being told certain things by people around you. Like I was mentioning in school, I was told constantly, okay, you have ADD, you're different, you're weird, you got to be in this other class over at the back corner of the building where people can't see you, that kind of stuff. And I think that if you allow yourself to believe things that everyone's telling you, if you're allowing people to kind of stifle your feelings and in the way that you perceive things too frequently, then it can become a problem, you know. And I think that it translates over to people who also fear the jump to start business. I think that their friends and family and coworkers, for the most part, are normal people who work 9-to-5 jobs and believe in the path of stability and a guaranteed paycheck. And although nothing's guaranteed, as something I experienced, as I mentioned, but so, you know, because these people are mostly the ones around you, they're the ones who are able to give you immediate feedback or opinions, whether warranted or not. And you know, most of these people are doubters. You know, they don't see how someone could make the sacrifice of going off on your own. They don't understand how something is created and built out of nothing. It's crazy to them, you know. And oftentimes, even if it's out of genuine concern, they just advise against it. So when you have a vision and everyone around you, including people you love and trust, seem on the fence, it can cause you to doubt yourself. And ultimately, again, that boils down to a fear of failure. You know, your loved ones don't want to see you fail, and your doubts created by their doubts, you know, can cause failure. So I think that's what stops a lot of people to pull the trigger and go off on their own. And that's something that, you know, getting back to your first question about that is that, you know, I think that part of my problem as a young man was that I didn't believe it. I guess I didn't believe enough in myself at the time, and I didn't allow myself to not see myself as an outsider or a misfit. And because I was, you know, sort of shuffled off to the side, I sort of got into the way of thinking of, oh, okay, I am messed up. There is something wrong with me. Whereas as an adult, I've been able to realize, well, man, look, you know, the fact that I can't stay still, and the fact that I have a high level of energy means that I can attack a lot more things with a lot more gusto than a lot of people can. You know, I'm able to grind away and record 2 episodes a week, and when actually I release 2 episodes a week. I usually record about 6 to 8 episodes a week. But the point is that I put a lot into it, and that's a superpower based on my hyperactivity. My OCD, for example, obsessive compulsive disorder, for those of you guys that aren't therapists, my OCD is basically I'm a little bit of an obsessive kind of neurotic personality in a lot of ways. And I think that kind of has helped me in the sense of organizing what I'm doing. I'm not an organized person. If you saw my house, you'd probably vomit. But as far as laying out plans and things like that, I'm pretty good at structuring plans and figuring out how I want things to flow and move and things like that. And that's really helps me a lot. So,
wow.
Getting through school, as I said, I didn't make it through school. But I think I've also realized that that's not completely my fault. I mean, certainly I could have harnessed a better work ethic as a kid and everything, but a lot of it had to do with the fact that I was in a system that was set up for a certain type of person, and it just really wasn't for me. And there's not anything wrong with that as long as you understand what your strengths and weaknesses are, and don't just focus on your weaknesses, but kind of really emphasize your strengths and learn to appreciate them.
I'll tell you this. I'm actually very careful who I hang around with, and the last person I want to hang around with, or people I want to hang around with, are people that are extremely negative, people that quit, and I think as either even in jiu-jitsu, or even as a musician, I mean, I really focus on hanging around people that are inspiring, that are, of course, inspiring to me, that keep me going, that are encouraging. Because, when you're in this boat by yourself as a podcaster, as a musician, I mean, we get, there's a lot of rejection. There's a lot of no's. There's a lot of frustrations that we go through. And the last thing that we want to go ahead and do is hang around people that have these negative thoughts. It's enough, talking negative around us, but then, of course, they probably take themselves out of doing anything. And it's just really a bad vibe that I don't like to be around. And I just think what you're saying is that, you probably hang around people that are inspiring and that are, encouraging to you as well. It's
funny because that was another thing in school too, is that, like I said, I carried a real chip on my shoulder about, my position and being sort of in a behavior disorder class, and not being part of not feeling like part of like a regular kid, like a regular guy. And,
right.
And it really, it really made me angry, and it made me sort of affiliate myself with people that had, similar negative attitudes and also had chips on their shoulders. And, I still have some friends, my lifelong friends, that are still great friends of mine, but there was a lot of people I hung out with that anyone could have looked at that group and said, hey man, maybe you should have spent your time with these guys.
Sure.
But I just felt like that's what I was worth. I felt like that's where I fit in, and that's where, that's what my options were. And I found that, that's probably the greatest thing that jiu-jitsu did for me is when I got into jiu-jitsu, just before my 21st birthday, my social circle cleaned up. I mean, it's almost not even comparable. You know what I mean?
Sure.
So the people I've been able to meet through jiu-jitsu and the positive outlooks that they have, and the successful people I've gotten to become close to and things like that, has really inspired me immensely to just be a better version of myself. So I'm with you 100%, man. There's a lot of really negative people I've had to cut out of my life, and some of them now have very different lives than I have ended up with, and I'm really thankful that I had clarity once I started jiu-jitsu to realize the difference between the kinds of people I was training with and the kinds of people I was going home to hang out with afterwards. And
right.
It just got to the point where I'm like, man, I can't hang out with these guys anymore. I don't relate to them anymore.
Sure. I want to get into your story about you being bullied, and one of the things that you mentioned was because of your size. And of course, this podcast is based around bullying and bully prevention, but also it talks about making right choices. And I found a statistic a few months ago where West Virginia is ranked number 1 with the most bullying on school property. And of course, Ohio is actually ranked number 2. And then, if that wasn't bad enough, West Virginia is actually ranked number 3 with the most drug overdoses, and we're dealing with this opioid epidemic now that I'm sure that the whole country is facing. And, but 1 out of 3 kids are actually bullied every day of the school year. There's over 76,000 kids that don't go to school because they're afraid of being bullied. And one of the statistics that I was alarmed at first was that over 85% of all bullying that takes place is that there's no intervention. But there's different kinds of bullying, and we can go ahead and go into really detail about bullying. But can you give us your story about you being bullied throughout school?
Yeah, sure. So my thoughts and opinions on bullying are probably different than some other guests you've had on before, and I'll elaborate on that more as we go. But throughout my life, I was bullied by various people in school and in the neighborhood I grew up in. The neighborhood I grew up in went through a lot of interesting changes over time. And in the late 90s, the apartment complex that I lived in had a PR disaster and got sued by many tenants, and a lot of people broke their leases during that time and were able to move away and stuff. So the neighborhood kind of emptied out about halfway. And it forced the company that owned the apartment complex to sell it to an outside management company. And right around that same time, Atlanta began systematically shutting down housing projects around the city, and issuing Section 8 tickets to residents and stuff in order to fill all these vacancies. So in order to fill these vacancies, the new management company of our apartment complex decided to accept Section 8, which brought in tons of families who were previously in the projects. And this brought with it a lot of pretty tough kids into the neighborhood. And for the most part, I got along with everybody, but there were definitely bullies around. It's also important to note that I was really small for my age, as you mentioned, and I had a real smart mouth, so I've had my clock cleaned more times than I can count. And I'd say a good 75% of those incidents were due to me, paying for something I did or said.
No.
But as far as the other 25%, I was picked on by various bullies just for various reasons. And but I always felt like these guys picked on anyone that was smaller than them or who couldn't beat them in a fight. So it wasn't like I felt like I was being completely singled out or anything like that. But regardless, it sucked, and it definitely wasn't fun. As an adult, I've definitely, it's caused me to harbor some real disdain for bullies. So yeah, that's kind of it in a nutshell,
So let me ask you this. So your bullying episodes, it was just like an off and on thing? It wasn't like it lasted for throughout elementary, and then when you went to junior high, it stopped because that person that bullied you is no longer there. But it just kept on going then through school. Is that correct?
Yeah, so basically, Atlanta's a pretty big city, and there's a lot of people, especially in the 90s after the Olympics. That's actually what brought my family here initially. Was my mom was on the part of the organization team that was helping get the Olympics into Atlanta and everything. So that's what brought us here. It's a city where people are constantly coming in and out. It grew very rapidly after the Olympics. And our neighborhood, basically people would be there for, sometimes only a few months, and then they'd leave, or they'd be there for a long time. And my family, along with a lot of my close friends that I still have to this day, lived there for a long time. We just lived in the apartments for a very long time. That's where we lived. And so the benefit of that was that if someone was a bully, if someone came in and there was a guy that just seemed to always be messing with people and picking on people and stuff, sometimes they'd only live there for like a summer. You know what I mean? And they'd just be gone, and they'd move away. And you're like, oh, thank God that guy's gone. He was an asshole.
Sure.
So, David, am I allowed to swear on your podcast? I'm sorry. I forgot to ask. Did you keep it clean?
Oh no, you're fine, man. This is I appreciate you asking, but okay. You're fine.
Okay. So yeah, sorry about that. So
I know. Hey, you know what? I've listened to your podcast, and it is funny because there's some guys like Kurt and other people that just go nuts, But anyway, but everybody knows Kurt, But anyway, but you're fine.
Yeah, no. When Kurt's on the podcast and when I'm uploading it to iTunes, they ask if it's explicit. I feel like I have to punch my keyboard to emphasize. But anyway, so guys would be moving in and out and stuff. So like people weren't there for like a crazy amount of time. Although there were guys that that lived in the neighborhood for a long time too, and you had to kind of deal with them. But I wouldn't say I had one bully that was around forever, for like a long time. You know, it was more just sort of the cool thing about growing up where I did is that there were so many kids. Like when you went outside, our apartment complex in New York or in Atlanta looked like scenes you'd see of like old New York, like in Manhattan, where kids are all in the street playing stickball and stuff. It was just like that. There was just kids everywhere, and it was hundreds and hundreds of kids outside all the time. So there's always in every big group of people like that, it's going to be a big, there's different kinds of personalities within any crowd. So there's always going to be someone that's an ass, you know. So
let me ask you, not to interrupt you or anything else. Let me ask you this. Bullying, they're saying that bullying is of course is worse today than it has ever been. And of course, I'm not for sure if you've been keeping up on on all the tragedies that were taking place, on the school property and all the shootings and since from January of this year to the end of school year, they said that there was close to 100 people, that were killed because of the, just these are in school property and everything else. That doesn't count like San Antonio where a guy shoots into a church building. But in regards to bullying, everything's based around bullying, and these people that actually, did the shooting are obviously they were an outcast and, they weren't accepted and everything else. But how do you think bullying can be prevented? I mean, do you feel like the parents could prevent it to teachers, or do you think it's, the person that's actually getting bullied? What's your thoughts on that?
Yeah, sure. Well, so let me start by addressing something you mentioned there. You said that it seems like it's worse today than ever. And I got to be honest, I question that a little bit. Okay. I'm not saying it's not bad today, and I'm not even saying that it's not as bad today.
Sure.
But what I'm saying is that we one thing that I've always noticed that was different about when I grew up in the 90s versus kids now is that kids now, everything is documented and filmed because of smartphones and social media. The information age is super quick. You can catch people you can catch kids now. Kids, like I'm really thankful that I didn't grow up now because for a lot of reasons. First of all, you would have seen me getting my ass kicked a lot on YouTube. But secondly, with all those like school fight videos and stuff. But these kids, they're so out there in public view, in the public eye, and getting caught for things, in my opinion, now is significantly easier than it was before. I remember in the 90s, like, man, you'd get away with a lot of shit, man. There was so much stuff you could get away with because, man, people weren't filming it or taking pictures of it or talking about it openly on social media and things like that. So, and cameras just weren't everywhere. So bullying, in my opinion, from what I saw as a kid and went through a little bit, was pretty heavy, man. It was. I think it was probably. I mean, I'm sure that now there's equal severity of bullying, but I would argue that guys probably got away with it a lot more in the 90s just because you didn't get caught as easily because there weren't phones everywhere. Every time a fight breaks out, every kid around has the newest iPhone. They whip it out and they film it and they upload it to WorldStar. So. Man, I would have been seriously in some embarrassing videos had that been in my time. I was like I don't know. When I was in 5th grade, I looked like I was in 3rd, and when I was in 9th grade, I looked like I was in 6th. So I was small, like I said, and I had a real big mouth, and guys had clocked me for it. So I don't know. Like the thing is that as far as what you were saying, I question whether or not it's actually worse now than it's ever been, or if now we're just seeing it more because of all the video and social media that's out there. You know what I'm saying? I agree. I agree with what you're saying, and I think and I've actually interviewed people that, of course, that are older than I am. And they don't even really remember the word bullying. It's just like, we teased each other, we picked on each other, and that was it. And I think what you had to say was that now that it's being documented and it's being videotaped, that's a big
reason, I think. But also, I think what makes it, they say what makes it so bad now, it's just that, you don't just have the physical bullying, you have the verbal bullying, but also you have the mental isolation, and you have the Facebook and everything else. And so everything, like you said, is documented. And then you got hundreds and thousands of people, that, get on the train. But it's still not a good thing to go through by any means of imagination. I mean, it's a horrible thing to do, because I get messages from parents where their kids are getting bullied, where they go to the teacher, they go to the principal, and they say, "Listen, man, my kid is being bullied. Can you stop it?" And then they, for some reason, they don't do anything. But one of the things, and I've interviewed principals and counselors and teachers. One of the things they say you have to document it, because when your kid is getting bullied, your emotions get really involved, and you start reacting and hastily and everything else, and it's just it just gets out of hand. But
yeah. Well, I think that. Oh, I'm sorry.
No, go ahead.
I was going to say, I think that another issue is that the reason why we're having mass shootings and things like that, because I mean, guns I'm not going to get into a gun discussion here in the show, but guns have always been around.
Next time.
It's not a new thing. Guns have existed since forever. I think what's happening now is that the system is set up in a way, like you just mentioned, where teachers and principals are encouraging parents to get involved and to document and to report and everything else. And that's very different than how it was when I was growing up. When I was growing up, at least where I grew up, maybe it's different in other places, but where I grew up, parents taught their kids how to defend themselves. They taught them how to fight. Like, I remember, you'd always see a dad holding mitts for his kids somewhere in the park, growing up, or you'd see kids getting into martial arts or on a wrestling team or something like that. And they were encouraged to learn to defend themselves and stick up for themselves. One big difference that I've noticed recently, in modern kind of, in this decade, is that there seems to be much less of that and much more of, we got to do something as a community to stop this. We got to do something to report and document. And if kids defend themselves, they're going to get just as much trouble as the person picking on them. That way, no one will fight. And I think that's part of the reason why kids now they get so isolated, and they get so defenseless, and they feel like the rules are so stacked against them that they can't defend themselves if they wanted to, and they're afraid to get in trouble and this and that they have to just take it. And I think that that's kind of nurtured an environment where kids are now just building up this violent fire within them of anger and resentment and sadness and hopelessness and everything else, and that's causing them to snap.
Right. Right.
And this is where my opinions on bullying are, like I mentioned earlier, a lot different than some people's opinion on it. And before I go into it, I know that girls are just as commonly the victims of bullies as boys are. From what I've seen, girls are often bullied more on the emotional and psychological side, like you mentioned earlier, and
sure.
a little more than boys are probably. But being physically bullied happens to both sexes as well. But boys seem to get the physical bullying a little more from what I've seen. And with that being said, I'm no expert. I don't have statistics in front of me, but I typically like to speak from personal experience. So because I didn't grow up as a girl, I'll mainly be addressing what young men go through, since I can speak from that personal experience. So I've seen lots of attempts to stop bullying with zero tolerance policies and awareness groups and ribbons and social media hashtags. And in my opinion, it's all crap. It's completely useless. Schools adopting, I would say that of those things, schools adopting a zero tolerance policy is maybe the least useless of those things, because at least if someone gets bullied in view of teachers, they can get kicked out of school or whatever, But you have to keep in mind that many teachers out there are completely useless too, if we're being real. There are so many teachers who either just don't see their job, they either just see their job as a paycheck, or they don't really care. Maybe they cared at one time, but through years of dealing with BS have become kind of burned out in their job. So the same way you can't depend on the police to immediately save you in every situation, you can't expect a teacher to protect your kid either. You have to understand that rules and laws get broken by those who commit banned acts. You mentioned the opioid epidemic in the country. Heroin's illegal, in case anybody didn't know. But if you cruise through North Avenue in Atlanta, you can find plenty of people buying and selling it. It doesn't mean that just because the law is there that it's going to be obeyed. And
right.
And then there's other obstacles as well, like where kids can't defend themselves and things like that. So the kids that are following the rules, are usually the ones that are getting picked on by the kids that are not following the rules. So if your kid's school has a zero tolerance policy, you can also be assured that bullies are going to be smarter with their tactics. They're not going to assault your kid in the cafeteria in front of everybody. They're going to corner them in a locker room or at a bus stop or somewhere where the teachers aren't present. And believe me, there are lots of times that your kids are not going to be directly supervised throughout the day. And when that happens, no amounts of regulation or ribbons or awareness movements and things like that are going to help them. So the answer, in my opinion, and this is the one that, again, a lot of people are going to disagree with this, but the answer, in my opinion, is controlled application of violence. I think that bullies typically target people who they feel are easy targets. They feel they possess some advantage, usually physical, over the person they're picking on. They do it because it's easy. It's a great way to deter someone from picking on you is to display and apply a violent retaliation. Now, when I say violence, I'm not talking about obviously shooting people or anything like that. I'm talking about sticking up for yourself and using a reasonable amount of self-defense to stop the situation. And violence is the option that's often completely unconsidered in the world of bullying awareness. It's the great big elephant in the room, in my opinion. The parents and teachers have tried and failed miserably for decades to find nonviolent solutions to bullying. And, what parents need to understand is that using your words to quell bullying doesn't help. It just doesn't. Another thing that parents need to understand, and this is a big one for parents listening, is that you getting involved and showing up to the school to have a sit down with the parents of a bully or encouraging your kid to tell a teacher when he's being bullied is the same as dousing the situation in gasoline and tossing a match on it. You know what I mean? Now your kid's going to be labeled as a snitch and a sissy and a mama's boy and a bunch of other words I won't even use here. So you'll completely destroy your kid's social status by getting involved and encouraging them to tell them.
So let me ask you this, Ryan. So since there's no intervention and really the kids aren't telling their parents or their teachers and the parents are involved, the teachers are involved. So really it does lay on the person that's getting bullied. So, and I think this is a good intro in jiu-jitsu. I think, and it's amazing how jiu-jitsu has helped my confidence. Just not with, not being afraid, because one of the reasons why I was, took the jiu-jitsu was because I was traveling from West Virginia to Nashville as a promoter, and I wanted to, make sure that I was able to defend myself. And, but I think that it's also helped me, being a full-time musician and trying to figure out ways on how I could overcome certain obstacles, for whatever reason. But I guess, do you feel that getting in martial arts or doing something? What can a person that's getting bullied do to prevent getting bullied any further?
That's actually exactly where I was going to go with that. Is that you got to get your kid involved in martial arts and encourage him to use it if he's physically attacked or if his space is aggressively invaded. The definition of an assault is when someone makes physical contact with you that's not permitted. That wasn't invited. So if someone spits on you, that's an assault. If someone shoves you, that's an assault. If someone messes up your hair, that's an assault. They put their hands on you, they weren't allowed to do that. Sure. And you have to teach kids that if they're going to learn to defend themselves, this is not just some stupid little game that they're playing after school. This is the thing that they're learning that they are allowed to use if someone physically invades their space or attacks them. And in my opinion, like I said, a controlled, violent response is the only solution, in my opinion, to dealing with someone who's physically harassing your kid. When a bully shoves your kid and the response he gets is a right cross to the face, he's going to understand immediately that a boundary's been set, and sure. he knows that your kid will fight back, and that will change the way that he views your kid. Now, all of a sudden, your kid's not a soft target for him anymore. Now, of course, there's an important caveat I think that's important to mention with all this, and that is that your kid may lose the fight. He may get pushed and clock the bully with a shot and then get beat up. But it's important for him to learn to fight back, regardless of the outcome. You can't go through this life being someone who's a doormat for other people. I think one of the major reasons we're seeing teen suicides, as I mentioned, as we were talking about earlier, is because of bullying. And I think the primary feeling these kids are going through is the feeling that they don't have any dignity. Dignity is something that everyone on this planet needs, and a life without it can be a very hard one to face. And I think it's important to teach kids that you can't win every fight. It's impossible. But that doesn't mean you don't try, especially if someone's trying to take away your dignity as a human being. You don't ever allow someone to assault you or humiliate you. And that's a clear boundary that needs to be, and that's a boundary that needs to be crystal clear. It's set by the child. And it's only set by fighting back. And, I've never heard in my life one bully say to another, yo, man, don't mess with that kid. He'll tell his mom on you. But if they know that you'll swing on them for putting their hands on you, you gain respect. It doesn't mean you gain their friendship. They may not ever like you, but they'll usually move on to another target, because ultimately bullies aren't looking for fights. They're looking for someone that they can take their day out on. Right. And if, a fight is not what they're interested in. So teach your kids to be good, kind, empathetic, disciplined people through martial arts and through your parenting skills, who have clear boundaries and who will defend them by fighting. Awesome. And when someone, and in my opinion, that's the only solution. My instructor's instructor is Master Renzo Gracie. He's one of the greatest jiu-jitsu fighters of all time and a legendary figure in Brazilian jiu-jitsu and mixed martial arts. And one of my favorite quotes by him was about the spirit of fighting, and I'll paraphrase it because I can't remember word for word, but he basically was saying that people often see fighting as an ugly thing, like it's something that degrades a human being. But fighting is everything. You fight in the morning to get out of bed, and fighting is actually the best thing a man can have in his soul. And I think that quote from Renzo can be applied to every aspect of life. Whether you learn to quit and cower or to fight and stand up for yourself, it's going to become a habit, whichever one you choose. And your kids are going to grow up someday. Yeah.
Yeah. Not to get off on a different subject, but since you mentioned Renzo, I was reading on Facebook. Did I hear that he's actually thinking about doing another MMA fight?
Yeah, I think Renzo had a couple things that he was talking about doing. He was going to do a super fight with Matt Hughes in jiu-jitsu. Oh, well, not jiu-jitsu. It would have been a grappling match. And then I think he got injured or something happened, and then of course Matt Hughes was involved in that horrible car wreck not long ago. His car got hit by a train. So, right. So I don't know if he's even going to be able to still do anything if ever again. And then there was also, there's a thing going on right now between Renzo and Bullied, who's another legendary figure in jiu-jitsu, who's also been on the show and everything. And those guys have a long, 30-plus year beef, and it kind of through social media got sparked again. So there's been talk of both of them kind of calling each other out a little bit, but I don't know if that's ever going to actually happen or not.
Well, Brian, before we actually wrap up the show, is there anything that you want to let the listeners know about your podcast or anything?
Basically you can find us on iTunes, and we're also at grapplingcentral.com, and it's like I said, it's a one-on-one interview with just different respected people within the grappling martial arts. Like I cover everything from Brazilian jiu-jitsu to wrestling to judo to sambo. So if you're interested in learning more about Brazilian jiu-jitsu and the sort of the mindset behind it and all that, definitely check out the show.
Well, that's about all we have on the Bully Resistance Show with David Wells. Before we go, I just want to thank all the sponsors again for supporting the show. Also, I just want to encourage all my listeners, if you have some extra time, you can actually go to my website, and there's more information about the Bully Resistance Show, about the CDs that I have out, and also just to get to know me a little bit better. But until next time, thanks for listening.